By the end of the Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, a terrible slaughter had taken place among the 180,000 combatants involved. The total number of killed and injured, suffered by all of the participating armies, is estimated to be around 45,000. Meaning, roughly 1 in 4 of those who participated became a casualty. In that horrific tally, 10,000 were killed or died of their injuries, during and after the savage conflict. Today, one has to be wary of the mistaken and sensationalized statements, claiming wildly exaggerated casualty fatalities, related to the Battle of Waterloo. The common myth, perpetuated by those who make pretenses, in their researching of this historical topic, often revolves around the fantasy, of 50,000 soldiers getting killed at Waterloo. In other words, the ludicrous estimate, of 1 out of 3, of all combatants losing their lives, is being falsely stated. This commonly heard mistake, is associated with those persons who are trying to seek historical information, having no concept of what the real researching of facts actually means, particularly in the cross-referencing of legitimate references, as opposed to immediately copying from flawed sources. Secondly, they also have no educated awareness of the correct definition of a casualty, actually meaning a person being injured or killed in an event. Instead, their misinterpretation is that a casualty refers only to those who are killed. 2 examples of this myth creation can be seen at fairly high levels. The first is from the British TV show, Fake or Fortune. Supposedly, the show is based on the extraordinary researching of the history of the featured artworks and artifacts. In its Season 9, Episode 3 show, a military painting by the 19th century artist, Landseer, is discussed. A statement from one of the show's hosts, convincingly declared, that 50,000 soldiers were killed at the Battle of Waterloo.
20,000 horses and nearly 50,000 men died at Waterloo. Landseer's bloody battle scene clearly held great meaning for the man who commissioned it.
The second, takes place in the disastrously inaccurate, 2023 Ridley Scott movie, Napoleon. Alongside the exceptionally flawed and fantasized recreation, in its Battle of Waterloo finale sequence, the movie's end credits included the false statement that 47,000 soldiers were killed at the Battle of Waterloo. Another myth tends to insinuate that all the dead and wounded at Waterloo were located in a small 2-mile square area only. This is false. The Battle of Waterloo had an extensive frontage, across which the day-long and nighttime ferocious deadly combat took place. Roughly 4 miles covered the main action, from the western side of the battlefield, to the eastern areas, where the Prussian army made its first entry halfway into the action, advancing from the Paris woods. At certain notoriously grisly places on the battlefield, there were literally piles of dead bodies. These sites being, the woodlands and grounds of the Chateau of Beaumont, the farmhouse of Les Cent, the village of Plunsonworth, in the deep sunken lanes, at the central crossroads, and across the summit of the domineering hill of Moncenchon. Here too, in one spot, there was a particularly distinctive horrid sight, of a large mound of dead French cavalry men and horses, just in front of where, Captain Mercer's British Horse Artillery Battery, decimated several French cavalry attacks, that were fanatically directed upon them. In the French army's centre and rear, where the deadly infantry squares of Napoleon's Imperial Guard, made their epic last stands and tenacious fighting retreats. It often goes unnoticed, that there were many dead and dying soldiers, in Wellington's Allied Army's medical aid stations, that were located just behind the battle zone. Many were crammed inside the hospitals to the rear, in places such as the Belgian capital of Brussels, just 12 miles north of the battlefield. There were many dead bodies of Allied Army soldiers, strewn on the main highway leading north to Brussels and in the blood-drenched ditches alongside it. Soldiers died, succumbing to their injuries, as they tried to get to medical stations, either alone on foot, or assisted by comrades, or transported in wagons, that were overfilled with seriously wounded and dying men. Along the same highway, leading off the south of the battlefield, dead bodies lay all along it. These were mostly French victims of the ruthless and total pursuit, launched by the vengeance-filled Prussians, as they chased Napoleon's defeated army off the battlefield into the late-night moonlit hours. This merciless episode took its worst toll, in and around the narrow road and bridge-congested town of Genappe. As the French retreated that night, they could see in the moonlight, the unburied dead bodies of more soldiers, who had fallen 2 days earlier, at the Battle of Quatre Bras. Most had been stripped naked, by marauding local peasants looting clothes and belongings. The next day, in several places on the Waterloo battlefield itself, dead bodies were unceremoniously cremated in piles of twisted corpses, tossed into half-dug pits in the fields. Very few of the dead were found by searching comrades who provided the decency of a hasty burial. It would take up to 2 days, for the prioritized, severely injured and incapacitated Allied army casualties, to be evacuated from the battlefield to medical stations. Sadly, there were some French wounded who would have to wait up to 4 days before being evacuated. During the battle, there were infamous moments, of crazed bloodthirsty French and Prussian soldiers alike, massacring each other's helplessly wounded. After the battle, some of the French wounded were murdered where they lay, mostly by stray Prussian soldiers. But many of the injured, who lay exposed for days on the battlefield, were very generously tended to, by the local Belgian inhabitants.